Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth batch of readings, and really one reading and one long, really a documentary film. As you'll see, there's warnings up about the film, not because of any particular thing it says, but because of the repeated scenes of extreme violence that it shows. I think anybody who finds himself disturbed by such images in a serious way. I mean, we all find them disturbing, but anyone who thinks that they would be better off not seeing it, you don't have to watch the film, or you don't have to watch the whole thing. If it begins to disturb you, turn it off. Or if if you think that it's not worth seeing those things, then turn it off. Or for whatever reason, turn it off. It's okay. I think it's an extremely interesting film. I don't agree with a lot of it, but that doesn't mean anything. I think it's interesting proposal about our relationship with death. But again, there are warnings up about it, and also I just want to tell you now that you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. Some of you, I think, when you start watching it, will feel compelled to keep on watching it because of something in it that might resonate with your own ideas, and that's the point. So again, you don't have to watch it. If you don't, or you don't have to keep watching it. You don't have to watch it at all. I mean, whatever you want to do. I just thought it was an interesting subject. It's a film that is based, or it's a film about the group of academics. I think they're mostly psychologists. It doesn't matter. But a bunch of people who were really inspired by Ernest Becker's famous book from like 1972 or so called The Denial of Death, which is a very famous book in its time, and I'm sure is still in print. I have a kind of a ambiguous relationship with it. I think it's one of those books where I actually don't think it's a very good book, in the sense of the way I don't think it's written very well. On the other hand, it has at its center a very, very compelling and challenging thesis about death or death consciousness. We started this course with a little clip from Game of Thrones, and one of the things I find interesting about the people, the imaginary people in that world of Game of Thrones, is their death consciousness. They live. At least in the first couple of seasons, I didn't read the books, but I watched all the television shows. At least the first couple of seasons, there was a very heavy sort of sense that these people had a persistent death consciousness. That is, they thought about death a lot. And, that interests me because I think that most of us don't think about death a lot, and I don't even think we should think about death a lot. I think perhaps I think about death a little more than average just because I regularly teach a course on death. And that's been an interesting thing for me. Not a bad thing, I can tell you. But this is really Becker's thesis, as I take it, is a very interesting thesis about death consciousness. And I'll tell you a story for why I think it's got some. I give it some credibility. When my daughter was a little girl, one of the things that we do as parents is we spend a lot of time sitting on chairs in the dark, telling stories or talking to our children, helping them to get to sleep. It's spent many hours when my daughter was a baby, a young child, doing just that. And those are very good experiences, I think, intimate moments where you can talk with your child and really, converse on perhaps a more authentic level than we do as we run around in our lives. And anyway, your children will tell you things. And I remember, I don't know if she was 3. For some reason, I think she was about 3 when she started talking about death. Just one night, really. And I think it was that moment, perhaps, or a reflection of something that had happened to her recently, where she had become conscious of death. And she had realized the true nature of death, and that death was the ending of life, the irrevocable ending of life, and that it was a necessary thing that was going to happen to everybody, that everybody in her life, including her, would soon be gone. In any case, she expressed something, I don't know exactly how she put it, but it became clear to me from what she said that she had realized this fact about death. And I'll never forget in talking about it with her, what she asked me. And she said, "How are we going to fix it? How are we going to fix it?" I think that's a very natural response to a human being. Human beings, in my estimation, are a lot of different things, but one of the things that they are, I think, essentially, is creatures of imagination and problem solvers. And I think that perhaps in an evolutionary view, one of the reasons we have such strong mental abilities, and our mental abilities to imagine possibilities, is a very strong part of us, and is a very essential part for problem solving. Looking at a situation and imagining how it could be different, and how it could be fixed, and how you could bring about a better solution. It's just what we do as human beings. And then we confront things like death, and we find that our imaginative problem-solving capacities run up against a brick wall. We realize, and I had to tell her, that this is one of those problems that cannot be fixed. And in a way, everything starts from that, right? Once you realize that death is a problem that can't be fixed, excuse me, it's cats. Once you realize that death is a problem that can't be fixed, then you have to find other ways to cope with it. That is, either you, like Epicurus, you decide that it's not a problem at all, that it needs no fixing because it's not a bad thing. Or like Plato or the Bhagavad Gita, you solve the problem by saying that death is an illusion, really. It applies to the body, certainly, but there is a part of us that is deathless. Or you cope with it in other ways, and the Becker thesis is that after that initial realization of the fact of our mortality and the mortality of all human beings, we then spend the rest of our lives coping with the anxiety, fear, terror that our non-existence, that death fills us with when we become conscious of it. This thesis is very interesting, and I think it can go too far. But basically, one way of stating the thesis is that everything we do in life, both on an individual, political, and cultural level, is in some way meant to help us cope with that fundamental childhood insight that we are mortal and that we will die. That everything we do is, as the academics in the School of Psychology that they developed in the 1980s after reading Becker's work, fundamental work, they called it terror management theory. That is, in some way or another, everything we do is meant to assuage that fear that is still inside us, that child that first realized the fact of death and was terrified by it. That child is still inside us and still feels that way, but we have developed very complex and subtle ways of repressing that fear. And that, in a way, everything we do can be, at least can be, reduced or explained away or understood in reference to our ambivalent feelings about the fact that we're mortal creatures, and dealing with our fears, our frustrations, our anxieties, our objections, our sense of injustice, our sense of all sorts of complex ways we respond to that. So, I'm just telling you why I chose these two things. I mean, you'll look at them and read them, and if you want, look at the documentary and come up with your own